The alarm clock buzzed at exactly 6:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 6 months. Elena Rodriguez rolled out of bed in her small apartment, the same routine playing out once again. Coffee, shower, quick breakfast, and then off to another day that felt exactly like the one before. Elena worked 3 different jobs just to make ends meet. Her main job was at a clothing store downtown, but that barely covered her rent. Her second job was giving piano lessons to kids after school, which helped with groceries. But her favorite job, the one that actually made her feel alive, was playing piano at the fancy Meridian Hotel every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. The hotel was nothing like the world she grew up in. Everything sparkled with expensive marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and guests who wore clothes that probably cost more than she made in a month. But when she sat at that beautiful grand piano in the lobby, none of that mattered. For those few hours, she could escape into the music. As she walked through the hotel's glass doors that Tuesday afternoon, the familiar smell of expensive perfume and fresh flowers filled the air. The lobby was busy with the usual crowd. Business people typing on laptops, tourists taking photos, and wealthy guests sipping coffee while discussing their important lives. "Good afternoon, Elena," called out the hotel manager from behind the front desk. He was a strict man who always reminded her to keep the music soft and pleasant. "Remember, we want background music today. Nothing too loud or dramatic. We have some very important guests staying with us this week." She nodded and walked over to the piano, the same black grand piano that had become like an old friend to her. As she sat down on the familiar bench, she couldn't help but run her fingers gently over the smooth keys. This piano was worth more than everything she owned combined. Yet for a few hours each week it was hers. Elena started with some light jazz, the kind of music that would blend into conversations without drawing attention. She had learned exactly what the hotel wanted: music that was pretty but not too interesting, nice but not too emotional. It was the complete opposite of how she really wanted to play. At home, she had an old piano that her grandmother had left her. Half the keys stuck and it was terribly out of tune, but when she played on that old instrument, she poured her heart into every note. She played with passion, with fire, with all the dreams and struggles that filled her daily life. But here at the hotel, that kind of playing wasn't allowed. As she played the gentle melodies, her mind wandered to her younger brother Diego, who was studying to become a doctor. Every dollar she earned went toward helping him pay for medical school. He was so smart, so determined, and she believed in him completely. But the tuition bills seemed to grow bigger every month, and sometimes she wondered if she was fooling herself thinking they could ever get ahead. The afternoon crowd was typical, mostly business travelers and tourists who barely noticed the music. A few people glanced her way and smiled, but most were too busy with their own lives to pay attention to the girl at the piano, and that was fine with Elena. She had learned not to expect much attention. Her job was to be invisible, to provide a soundtrack to other people's important moments. Around 3 p.m., she took her usual break. The hotel provided her with free coffee and a small snack, which was one of the perks she truly appreciated. As she sipped her coffee in the back room, she could hear the sounds of the busy lobby continuing without her. Phones ringing, people talking, the constant hum of a world that moved fast and rarely slowed down. When she returned to the piano, she noticed an elderly man sitting in one of the leather chairs near her. He had kind eyes and was reading a newspaper, but she could tell he was listening to her music more carefully than most guests did. Something about the way he held his head, slightly tilted toward the piano, made her think he might actually understand music. But she didn't think much of it. After all, this was just another ordinary Tuesday at the Meridian Hotel. She had no idea that this particular day was about to become anything but ordinary. She had no clue that the gentle-looking man with the newspaper was about to change her entire life with a simple request. As she placed her fingers back on the keys and began to play another soft melody, Elena was completely unaware that she was just minutes away from a moment that would transform everything she thought she knew about her future. The ordinary day was about to become extraordinary, though she wouldn't realize it until it was already happening. For now, she was just Elena, the part-time piano player, doing her best to stay invisible while the important world of the Meridian Hotel continued around her. Elena was halfway through a gentle version of The Way You Look Tonight when she noticed the elderly gentleman from the leather chair walking toward her piano. She continued playing, assuming he was just passing by on his way to the elevator or the restaurant, but instead he stopped right beside the piano and waited patiently for her to finish the song. When the last note faded away, he smiled warmly and said, "That was beautifully played, my dear. You have wonderful touch." Elena felt her cheeks warm up. Compliments from guests were rare, and when they did happen, they usually felt polite rather than genuine. But something in this man's voice told her he really meant it. "Thank you so much," she replied, looking up at him. "That's very kind of you to say." The man extended his hand in a formal but friendly way. "I'm Vincent Costello. I'm staying in the penthouse suite this week." His voice had a slight accent that Elena couldn't quite place, and his clothes were elegant but not flashy. Elena shook his hand, surprised by how gentle his grip was. "I'm Elena Rodriguez. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Costello." Vincent's eyes lit up when she said her name. "Elena, such a lovely name. Tell me, do you know a piece called Für Elise by Beethoven?" Elena almost laughed. Of course she knew it. It was probably one of the first classical pieces any piano student learned. "Yes, I do. It's a beautiful piece." "Indeed it is," Vincent said, and for a moment his expression became distant as if he was remembering something from long ago. "It was my wife's favorite piece. She used to hum it while she cooked dinner, while she worked in the garden, even while she was doing the dishes." Elena could hear the love in his voice when he talked about his wife, and she noticed he said was instead of is. She felt a pang of sympathy for this kind stranger. Vincent continued, "Next week is my granddaughter's wedding. She's getting married in a small ceremony here in the city, and I've been thinking about my dear wife constantly. She passed away 3 years ago, and I know she would have loved to see our granddaughter in her wedding dress." Elena nodded, not sure what to say but feeling honored that this man was sharing something so personal with her. "I was wondering," Vincent said, his voice becoming a bit shy, "if you might play Für Elise for me, just once? It would mean the world to an old man who misses his wife very much." Elena's heart melted. How could she possibly say no to such a sweet request? "Of course, Mr. Costello, I'd be happy to play it for you." What Elena didn't know was that Vincent Costello wasn't just any guest at the hotel. For over 40 years, he had been one of the most respected music producers in the classical world. He had discovered and developed some of the most famous pianists, violinists, and opera singers of the past few decades. His ear for talent was legendary, and his name was whispered with respect in concert halls around the world. But Elena saw none of that. To her, he was simply a grandfather missing his wife, asking for a song that would help him remember happier times. Vincent also didn't mention that he had been struggling lately. His hearing wasn't what it used to be, and he had been thinking seriously about retiring. The magic of music that had driven his entire career seemed to be fading, and he wondered if his best days were behind him. He had come to this city for what he thought might be his final recording session with a major orchestra. As Elena positioned her hands over the keys, Vincent settled into the chair closest to the piano. He closed his eyes and prepared to listen to a simple, pleasant version of his wife's favorite song. Neither of them had any idea that what was about to happen would change both of their lives forever. "This is for your wife," Elena said softly, and Vincent nodded, his eyes still closed. Elena took a deep breath and began to play the opening notes of Für Elise. But as her fingers touched the keys, something unexpected began to stir inside her. Maybe it was Vincent's story about his wife, or maybe it was the way he had asked so humbly for this simple favor. But Elena felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel while playing at the hotel. She felt the music calling to her heart, asking her to play not just the notes but the emotion behind them. And for the first time in months of playing background music, Elena was about to let herself answer that call. Elena's fingers found the first few notes of Für Elise, just as she had played them hundreds of times before. The melody was gentle, familiar, safe, but as she continued, something began to shift inside her chest. She remembered being 7 years old, sitting beside her grandmother on the bench of that old, worn-out piano in their tiny apartment. Her grandmother's weathered hands had guided her small fingers to these exact same notes, teaching her that music wasn't just about pressing the right keys at the right time. "Music is about telling a story, mija," her grandmother had whispered. "Every note has something to say." As that memory washed over her, Elena felt her grandmother's presence so strongly it was almost as if the old woman was sitting right there beside her. And suddenly, Elena wasn't playing for the hotel guests anymore. She wasn't playing background music that was supposed to blend into the walls. She was playing for Vincent's wife, for her grandmother, for every love story that had ever been told through music. Her fingers began to dance across the keys with a life of their own. The simple melody of Für Elise transformed into something much deeper, much more emotional. She added her own delicate ornaments to the familiar tune, little flourishes that spoke of longing and love and loss. Her left hand found harmonies that Beethoven never wrote but that seemed to belong there perfectly. Vincent's eyes snapped open. In 40 years of discovering musical talent, he had heard Für Elise played by countless pianists, students, professionals, world-famous virtuosos. But he had never heard it played like this. Elena wasn't just playing the notes. She was painting with sound, telling a story that made his heart ache in the most beautiful way. Around the lobby, something magical began to happen. Conversations slowly died away as people became aware of the extraordinary music flowing from the piano. A businessman who had been typing furiously on his laptop stopped mid-sentence and looked up. A couple arguing quietly near the elevators fell silent and turned toward the sound. Elena was completely lost in the music now. Her eyes were closed, and her whole body swayed gently with the rhythm. She played with the kind of passion that comes from deep in the soul, the kind that can't be taught or faked. Every technique she had learned, every hour she had practiced, every dream she had ever harbored about being a real musician, it all poured out through her fingertips. The hotel lobby, which moments before had been filled with the busy noise of modern life, became as quiet as a cathedral. Even the staff behind the front desk stopped what they were doing and stared. The security guard by the door forgot to check his watch. The cleaning lady paused with her rag in midair. Vincent felt tears forming in his eyes. This wasn't just beautiful playing. This was the kind of raw, honest musicianship that he had spent his entire career searching for. Elena was taking a piece that most people considered simple and revealing layers of complexity and emotion that he had never heard before. As Elena moved into the more dramatic middle section of the piece, her playing became even more intense. Her fingers flew across the keys with perfect precision, but there was nothing cold or mechanical about her technique. Every note was alive with feeling. She played with the confidence of someone who had forgotten about everything except the music. A small crowd was beginning to gather around the piano now. Word was spreading through the hotel that something special was happening in the lobby. People were coming down from their rooms, drawn by the extraordinary music floating through the building. Elena reached the final section of Für Elise, and instead of simply repeating the opening theme as written, she transformed it into something entirely new. She played it like a prayer, like a love letter, like a goodbye kiss. The music spoke of memories treasured, of love that continues even after loss, of beauty that survives even in sadness. When the last note finally faded away, the silence in the lobby was complete. For several long seconds, nobody moved or spoke. It was as if Elena had cast a spell over everyone present and nobody wanted to be the first to break it. Then Vincent began to clap, slowly and deliberately. The sound seemed to wake everyone else from their trance, and suddenly the entire lobby erupted in applause. But Vincent's clapping was different from the others. He wasn't just appreciating a nice performance. He was recognizing something extraordinary, something that didn't come along very often in a lifetime. Elena opened her eyes, blinking in confusion as she saw the crowd that had gathered around her. Her cheeks flushed red as she realized that her careful, invisible background music had turned into something very much the opposite. "My dear," Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion, "that was absolutely magnificent. In all my years, I have rarely heard anything so beautiful." Elena looked around at all the faces staring at her, suddenly feeling very small and very exposed. She had broken every rule the hotel had given her about keeping the music quiet and unobtrusive. But as she looked into Vincent's kind eyes, she saw something there that made her heart skip. She saw recognition. She saw respect. And most importantly, she saw the look of someone who truly understood what had just happened. What Elena didn't know was that her life had just changed forever. The applause in the hotel lobby seemed to go on forever. Elena sat at the piano bench, her hand still trembling slightly from the intensity of what had just happened. She had never experienced anything like this before, the feeling of a room full of strangers being completely captivated by her music. But her moment of wonder was interrupted by the sound of fast footsteps clicking across the marble floor. The hotel manager was rushing toward her, and the expression on his face made Elena's stomach drop. She had definitely broken the rules about keeping the music quiet and in the background. "What's going on here?" the manager demanded, looking around at the crowd that had gathered. "This is supposed to be a peaceful lobby, not a concert hall." Before Elena could answer, Vincent stepped forward. "Sir, what just happened here was extraordinary. This young lady has a remarkable gift." The manager looked frustrated. "That may be true, but we have standards to maintain. Our guests expect a certain atmosphere." His complaint was cut short by an older woman who had been sitting in the lobby during Elena's performance. "Excuse me," she said, approaching the manager with confidence. "I've been staying at luxury hotels around the world for 30 years, and I have never experienced anything as beautiful as what just happened here. If this is the kind of talent your hotel showcases, I will definitely be recommending it to all my friends." Other guests began nodding and expressing similar sentiments. A businessman pulled out his business card and handed it to Elena. "I organize corporate events," he said. "I would love to discuss hiring you for some of our functions." Elena looked around in amazement. People were taking photos with her, asking for her contact information and praising her playing. But what she didn't notice was a young woman in the corner of the lobby who had been recording the entire performance on her phone. The woman, a college student named Riley who worked part-time at a local music blog, had been in the lobby meeting a friend when Elena began playing. She had pulled out her phone to record what she thought would just be a nice moment, but she quickly realized she was capturing something much more special. As the crowd around Elena began to disperse, Riley quietly uploaded the video to her social media accounts with the caption, "Mystery pianist at downtown hotel just blew everyone away with the most incredible performance I've ever heard. Who is this amazing woman?" Within an hour, the video had been shared dozens of times. By evening, it had been shared hundreds of times. People were tagging their friends, leaving comments about how the music had moved them, and asking if anyone knew who Elena was. The hotel manager, who had initially been annoyed by the disruption, began to notice something interesting happening. The phone at the front desk was ringing constantly with people asking about the pianist in the lobby, reservations. For the next few days were suddenly booking up as people hoped to catch another performance. By the next morning, the video had gone viral. It had been shared thousands of times across different platforms, and local news stations were starting to pick up the story. The headline, "Mystery Pianist Transforms Hotel Lobby into Concert Hall," was trending on social media. Elena had no idea about any of this. She had gone home after her shift feeling confused and overwhelmed by what had happened. She had never experienced such a strong reaction to her playing, and she wasn't sure if she should be excited or worried about having broken the hotel's rules. But Vincent knew exactly what was happening. As someone who had spent decades in the music industry, he recognized the signs of a viral moment. More importantly, he recognized the signs of authentic, extraordinary talent that couldn't be ignored. Vincent had spent the evening making phone calls to contacts he hadn't spoken to in months. He reached out to conductors, talent agents, and recording executives, all of whom trusted his judgment implicitly. He told them about what he had witnessed, and more importantly, he sent them the video that was now circulating online. The response was immediate and unanimous. Everyone who saw the video wanted to know who Elena was and how they could get in touch with her. Meanwhile, at the hotel, the staff was scrambling to handle the sudden influx of attention. The lobby was busier than it had ever been, with people hoping to catch another spontaneous performance. The hotel's website was getting more traffic than it had received in months. The hotel manager, who had initially been concerned about Elena's rule-breaking, was now seeing the business opportunity that had fallen into his lap. He began making plans to feature Elena more prominently, perhaps even advertising her performances as a special attraction. But what none of them realized was that Elena was about to face a much bigger decision than whether or not to continue playing background music at a hotel. Vincent Costello was preparing to make her an offer that would force her to choose between the safe, predictable life she had built and the uncertain but extraordinary possibilities that were suddenly opening up before her. The ripple effect of that one performance was spreading far beyond the marble walls of the Meridian Hotel, reaching people and places Elena had never imagined. And at the center of it all was a young woman who had simply played from her heart, not knowing that sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. Elena arrived at the hotel the next day expecting to find everything back to normal. She thought maybe people would have forgotten about yesterday's performance and she could return to her quiet routine of background music. But as soon as she walked through the glass doors, she knew something was very different. The lobby was packed with people, far more than she had ever seen on a typical Thursday afternoon. Some were sitting in the chairs near the piano. Others were standing around with their phones ready, and a few were even asking the front desk staff when the pianist would be performing. Elena felt her heart racing. This was not what she had signed up for when she took this job. She was supposed to be invisible, not the center of attention. As she made her way toward the piano, trying to avoid eye contact with the expectant crowd, she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Vincent smiling warmly at her. "Good afternoon, Elena," he said. "Might I have a word with you before you begin playing today?" Elena nodded, grateful for any excuse to delay facing the waiting crowd. Vincent led her to a quiet corner of the lobby, away from the curious onlookers. "First," Vincent said, "I want you to know that what happened yesterday was truly special. You have a gift that is rare and precious." Elena felt herself blushing. "Thank you, Mr. Costello, that's very kind of you to say." Vincent looked at her carefully as if he was making an important decision. "Elena, I haven't been entirely honest with you about who I am." Elena felt a flutter of nervousness. "What do you mean?" "My name is indeed Vincent Costello, and everything I told you about my wife and granddaughter is true. But what I didn't mention is what I do for a living." Vincent paused, watching Elena's expression. "I'm a music producer. I've been working in the classical music industry for over 40 years. Elena's eyes widened. The name Vincent Costello suddenly sounded familiar, though she couldn't quite place where she had heard it before. "I've had the privilege of working with some of the world's most renowned musicians," Vincent continued. "I've produced recordings that have won Grammy Awards, and I've helped launch the careers of pianists who now perform in the greatest concert halls around the world." Elena felt dizzy. This kind, grandfatherly man who had simply asked her to play his wife's favorite song was actually someone important in the music world. "But Elena," Vincent said, his voice becoming more serious, "in all my years of discovering and developing talent, I have rarely encountered raw ability like what I heard yesterday. You don't just play the piano, you speak through it. You tell stories with it. You make people feel things they didn't expect to feel." Elena didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to run away from this conversation, to go back to her simple life where she didn't have to think about whether she was good enough for bigger things. "I've made some phone calls," Vincent continued. "There are people in this city right now, very important people in the classical music world, who would like to meet you." "What kind of people?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The conductor of the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra is in town this week for a recording session. His name is Maestro Chen, and he's one of the most respected conductors in the world. I've told him about you, and he's very interested in hearing you play." Elena felt like the floor was spinning beneath her feet. The Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra was one of those legendary ensembles that she had only dreamed about. She had listened to their recordings countless times, imagining what it would be like to perform with musicians of that caliber. "But Mr. Costello," Elena said, fear creeping into her voice, "I'm not that kind of pianist. I play in hotel lobbies and teach children. I've never even auditioned for anything serious." Vincent's expression became gentle but firm. "Elena, talent like yours doesn't come along very often. I've spent my entire career learning to recognize it, and I'm telling you that you have something extraordinary. The question is, are you willing to find out just how extraordinary it might be?" Elena looked around the lobby, at all the people waiting to hear her play, at the life she had built that was safe and predictable and small. Then she looked back at Vincent, who was offering her a doorway into a world she had never dared to imagine for herself. "What would I have to do?" she asked. "Just play," Vincent said simply. "Maestro Chen wants to hear you perform a more challenging piece, something that would showcase your technical abilities as well as your musical sensitivity. If you're interested, I can arrange an audition for tomorrow afternoon." Elena's mind was racing. An audition with one of the world's great conductors? It seemed impossible, too good to be true, like something that happened to other people, but never to someone like her. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like that," Elena said honestly. Vincent smiled. "My dear, if you were ready, it wouldn't be an opportunity for growth. The best musicians I've ever worked with were all terrified when they took their first big leap, but they took it anyway, because they knew that talent without courage is just a beautiful secret that the world never gets to hear." Elena felt tears forming in her eyes. For so long she had told herself that her dreams of being a real musician were just fantasies, that people like her didn't get chances like this. But here was Vincent Costello, a man who had spent his life discovering musical talent, telling her that she had something special. And suddenly Elena realized that the scariest thing wasn't the possibility of failing at this audition. The scariest thing was the possibility of never trying at all. Elena spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Vincent's offer kept playing through her mind like a song she couldn't turn off. An audition with the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra. It was the kind of opportunity she had dreamed about since she was a little girl, but now that it was actually within reach, it felt terrifying. By morning, she had made her decision. She was going to try. But as she got ready for work at the clothing store, reality began to set in. The audition was scheduled for Friday afternoon, which meant she would need to take time off from her regular job. When she called her supervisor to explain the situation, the response was immediate and harsh. "Absolutely not," her boss said coldly. "We're already short-staffed this week, and Friday is one of our busiest days. If you don't show up for your shift, don't bother coming back at all." Elena felt her heart sink. She needed this job. The money from the hotel piano playing and her piano lessons wasn't enough to cover her bills and help her brother with medical school. Losing her main source of income would be a disaster, but there was another problem that was even bigger. Elena's piano at home was in terrible condition. She had been putting off repairs for months because she couldn't afford them. Half the keys stuck when she pressed them, and several were completely silent. The pedals barely worked, and the whole instrument was terribly out of tune. How could she prepare for the most important audition of her life on a piano that was falling apart? Vincent had suggested that she prepare a challenging piece to showcase her abilities. He mentioned a Chopin nocturne or perhaps something by Rachmaninoff, composers whose works required both technical brilliance and deep musical understanding. But Elena couldn't even play a simple scale properly on her broken piano. That evening, Elena sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the old instrument that had been her companion for so many years. She placed her fingers on the keys and tried to play through one of the pieces Vincent had suggested. But the broken keys made it impossible to get through even a few measures. Tears of frustration began to flow down her cheeks. Here was the chance she had been waiting for her entire life, and she was going to have to give it up because of things she couldn't control. Her phone rang, interrupting her despair. It was her brother Diego calling from medical school. "Elena, I have some bad news," he said, and her heart sank even further. "The school has moved up the deadline for next semester's tuition payment. Instead of having until the end of the month, I need to pay by next week." Elena closed her eyes. The amount Diego needed was exactly what she would make working extra shifts at the clothing store. The same shifts she would miss if she went to the audition. "How much do you have saved up?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. "Almost nothing," Diego admitted. "I've been living on pasta and peanut butter sandwiches for weeks. Elena, I hate asking you for help again, but if I can't make this payment—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Elena knew how hard Diego had worked to get into medical school, how much he had sacrificed. The idea of him having to drop out because of money was unbearable. "Don't worry," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll figure something out." After she hung up, Elena sat in the silence of her apartment, feeling crushed by the weight of impossible choices. Take the audition and risk losing her job and her brother's future, or skip the audition and wonder for the rest of her life what might have been. The next morning, Vincent called her at the hotel. "Elena, I've arranged for you to use a practice room at the downtown conservatory," he said excitedly. "They have beautiful grand pianos there, and you can practice as long as you need to prepare for tomorrow's audition." Elena's throat felt tight. "Mr. Costello, I don't think I can do the audition." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What's wrong, my dear?" Elena explained about her job, about Diego's tuition deadline, about all the practical reasons why this opportunity had come at exactly the wrong time. Vincent listened quietly, and when she finished, he said, "Elena, I understand these concerns, and they're all very real. But let me ask you something. How will you feel in 20 years if you let this chance slip away?" "I don't know," Elena whispered. "I've seen many talented musicians over the years," Vincent said gently. "Some of them had perfect circumstances, wealthy families, the best teachers, every advantage you could imagine. But some of the most successful artists I've worked with were people who took enormous risks when they had every reason not to." Elena felt torn in half. Part of her wanted to be practical, to stick with what was safe and reliable. But another part of her, a part that had been quiet for too long, was screaming that this was her moment. "What if I'm not good enough?" Elena asked. "What if you are?" Vincent replied. "Elena, talent like yours is a gift, but it's also a responsibility. You have the ability to move people, to bring beauty into the world, to touch hearts in ways that most people never can. Don't you think you owe it to yourself, and to everyone who might be moved by your music, to find out how far that gift can take you?" That night, Elena made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her at the same time. She was going to take the audition, even if it meant risking everything she had worked so hard to build. Sometimes, she realized, the biggest risk is not taking any risk at all. Friday morning arrived with a gray sky that matched Elena's nervous mood. She had barely slept, her mind cycling between excitement and terror about what lay ahead. At 6 a.m., she called in sick to the clothing store, knowing she was probably ending her employment there but unable to bring herself to care anymore. The practice room at the downtown conservatory was like nothing Elena had ever experienced. The grand piano was perfectly tuned, its keys responding to her touch like silk. For 3 hours, she worked through the piece Vincent had suggested, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, a work that demanded both technical perfection and deep emotional expression. At first, her fingers felt clumsy and uncertain on the unfamiliar instrument, but gradually, as she became comfortable with the piano's responsiveness, something magical began to happen. The music that had been trapped inside her broken home piano suddenly had a voice worthy of its beauty. By noon, Elena felt as ready as she would ever be. Vincent met her at the conservatory and drove her to the concert hall where the audition would take place. During the car ride, he shared stories about other musicians he had discovered, trying to calm her nerves. "Remember," Vincent said as they pulled up to the imposing building, "you're not here to prove anything to them. You're here to share your gift. The music will do the rest." The concert hall was everything Elena had imagined and more. High ceilings, elegant architecture, and rows of empty seats that seemed to stretch on forever. At the center of it all sat a magnificent black grand piano, gleaming under the stage lights. Maestro Chen was a distinguished man in his 60s, with kind eyes and an air of quiet authority. With him were several other people, members of the orchestra's board, a few musicians, and some individuals Elena didn't recognize but who clearly belonged in this rarefied world of classical music. "Miss Rodriguez," Maestro Chen said, approaching her with a warm smile. "Vincent has told me remarkable things about your talent. We're very excited to hear you play." Elena felt her mouth go dry. These people had heard the world's greatest pianists. What could she possibly offer that they hadn't heard before? "What will you be performing for us today?" asked one of the board members. "The first movement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, Elena replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Maestro Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. "An ambitious choice. That's one of the most demanding pieces in the piano repertoire." Elena nodded, walking toward the piano on legs that felt like jelly. As she sat down on the bench and adjusted her position, she looked out at the small group of people who held her future in their hands. For a moment, doubt crashed over her like a wave. These people probably heard conservatory-trained musicians every day. What was she doing here? She was just a girl from a working-class family who played in hotel lobbies to pay the bills. But then she placed her hands on the keys, and something changed. The piano felt alive beneath her fingertips, ready to sing whatever song she asked of it. She closed her eyes and thought about her grandmother, about Vincent's wife, about all the love and loss and hope that music could express. When Elena began to play, the opening notes of the concerto filled the hall with a power and sensitivity that made everyone in the audience sit up straighter. This wasn't just technical proficiency. This was storytelling through music. The first movement of Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto is a journey through longing, passion, and triumph. Elena played it as if she had lived every emotion herself. Her fingers danced through the rapid passages with breathtaking precision, but it was her interpretation of the slower, more lyrical sections that truly captivated her listeners. Maestro Chen found himself leaning forward in his seat. In 30 years of conducting this concerto, he had never heard it played with such a perfect balance of technical mastery and emotional honesty. Elena wasn't just playing the notes that Rachmaninoff had written. She was channeling the composer's very soul. As Elena moved into the development section of the movement, her playing became even more intense. She attacked the challenging passages with fearless confidence, her hands flying across the keyboard with a fluidity that made the impossible look effortless. But even in the most virtuosic moments, the music never lost its emotional core. Vincent watched from the back of the hall, tears streaming down his cheeks. This was why he had dedicated his life to music, to witness moments like this, when raw talent and deep feeling combined to create something transcendent. The final section of the movement built to a magnificent climax, Elena's playing reaching heights of passion and power that filled every corner of the concert hall. When she struck the final chord, the sound seemed to hang in the air for an eternity before slowly fading into silence. For several long moments, nobody moved or spoke. Elena sat at the piano, her hands still on the keys, hardly daring to breathe. Then Maestro Chen began to applaud slowly and deliberately. The others joined in, but Elena could see something in their faces that went beyond polite appreciation. She saw amazement, excitement, and something that looked almost like awe. "Miss Rodriguez," Maestro Chen said, walking toward the piano. "That was absolutely extraordinary. In all my years, I have rarely heard such a combination of technical brilliance and musical maturity." Elena felt like she was dreaming. "Thank you, Maestro. That means everything to me. I have a proposition for you," Maestro Chen continued. "Our featured soloist for next month's concert series has had to withdraw due to illness. We need someone to perform Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto with the full orchestra. Would you be interested in the position?" Elena's heart stopped beating. Perform with the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra? In front of thousands of people? It was beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. But before she could answer, Maestro Chen continued, "There's more. We're planning to record this performance for a major label release, and if tonight goes well, we would like to discuss a longer-term relationship with you as a featured artist." Elena looked around the hall, at these distinguished people who were offering her the chance of a lifetime. Then she looked at Vincent, who was smiling at her with the pride of a father watching his daughter achieve her dreams. "Yes," Elena said, her voice full of wonder and determination. "I would be honored." What Elena didn't know was that her journey was just beginning, and that the simple tune she had played in a hotel lobby was about to transform not just her own life, but the lives of everyone who would hear her music in the years to come. 1 year later, Elena stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, looking out at an audience of over 2,800 people who had come to hear her perform. As she adjusted her elegant black concert gown, she could hardly believe how much her life had changed since that ordinary Tuesday afternoon at the Meridian Hotel. The concert with the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra had been a triumph beyond anyone's wildest expectations. The recording of Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto became one of the best-selling classical albums of the year, and Elena found herself suddenly in demand at concert halls around the world. Vincent had become not just her manager, but her mentor and friend. Under his guidance, Elena had learned to navigate the complex world of classical music while staying true to the authentic voice that had first captivated him. Together, they had carefully chosen opportunities that would showcase her talent without overwhelming her with too much too soon. But the success hadn't come without challenges. Elena had to learn how to handle the pressure of performing for audiences who had heard the world's greatest pianists. She had to develop the stamina needed for international touring, and she had to master a repertoire far more demanding than anything she had played before. Most importantly, she had to learn to believe in herself as more than just a girl who got lucky. With Vincent's help, she began to understand that her gift was real, valuable, and worthy of the attention it was receiving. The financial transformation had been just as dramatic as the artistic one. Elena was able to pay off all of Diego's medical school debt, and her brother was now in his final year of residency, well on his way to becoming the doctor he had always dreamed of being. But Elena hadn't forgotten where she came from, or the struggles that had shaped her. With her newfound success, she had established a scholarship fund for young musicians from working-class families, kids who had talent but lacked the resources to develop it properly. Tonight's concert at Carnegie Hall was special for many reasons, but perhaps the most meaningful was that it was a benefit performance for that scholarship fund. Elena had insisted that all proceeds go directly to helping young musicians get the training and opportunities they needed. As she prepared to walk onto the stage, Elena thought about the journey that had brought her here. The viral video from the hotel had now been viewed millions of times, inspiring countless people to pursue their own dreams. She regularly received messages from young musicians who said her story had given them the courage to keep practicing, to keep believing in themselves. The program tonight included the same piece she had played for her audition, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto, Number 2, but it also featured a world premiere of a piece that had been written specifically for her by a contemporary composer. It was a work that captured the emotional journey from struggle to triumph, from doubt to confidence, from dreams to reality. But perhaps the most special moment of the evening would come at the end, when Elena would perform a solo piece that held deep personal meaning for her. It was her own arrangement of Für Elise, the simple tune that had started everything. She had spent months working on this arrangement, transforming Beethoven's beloved piece into something that reflected her own musical voice, while honoring the memories of Vincent's wife and her own grandmother. It would be her way of completing the circle, of honoring the moment when her real journey began. Vincent appeared beside her in the wings, looking dapper in his tuxedo and beaming with pride. "How are you feeling, my dear?" he asked. "Grateful," Elena replied without hesitation. "A year ago, I never could have imagined any of this." "You know," Vincent said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about that day at the hotel quite a bit lately. I came to you asking for a simple tune to remember my wife by, and instead, you gave me something much more precious." "What's that?" Elena asked. "You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place," Vincent said. "You showed me that real artistry isn't about perfect technique or impressive credentials. It's about honesty, about courage, about the willingness to open your heart and let the world see what's inside." Elena felt tears forming in her eyes, but the stage manager was signaling that it was time. As she walked toward the stage entrance, Vincent called after her. "Elena, remember, you're not here to prove anything to anyone. You're here to share your gift." The same words he had spoken before her audition, words that had become her mantra whenever nerves threatened to overwhelm her. As Elena walked onto the stage of Carnegie Hall, the applause was thunderous. She took her place at the beautiful concert grand piano and looked out at the sea of faces. Somewhere in that audience were people who had traveled from around the world to hear her play. There were young musicians who saw her as inspiration, wealthy patrons who supported the arts, and critics whose reviews could make or break careers. But as Elena placed her hands on the keys and prepared to begin, she thought about the real reason she was here. She was here because music had the power to touch hearts, to bring beauty into the world, to connect people across all the differences that usually kept them apart. The opening notes of the Rachmaninoff concerto filled the hall, and Elena felt the same sense of joy and purpose she had experienced that day at the hotel. This was who she was meant to be. Not a background musician playing for people who weren't really listening, but an artist whose voice could move and inspire and transform. As the music soared through the magnificent hall, Elena knew that her journey was far from over. There would be more concerts, more recordings, more opportunities to share her gift with the world. But no matter how far her career might take her, she would never forget the lesson she had learned that day at the Meridian Hotel. Sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with the simplest requests. Sometimes all it takes to change everything is the courage to play from your heart, to share your authentic voice with the world, and to believe that your gift, whatever it might be, is worth sharing. Elena's story had become proof that dreams don't have to remain dreams forever. With talent, hard work, and the willingness to take risks when opportunity knocks, even the most ordinary day can become the first day of an extraordinary new life. And it all started with a simple tune, played with uncommon honesty, in a hotel lobby where nobody expected magic to happen.